Chaminuka is an ancient ancestral spirit of the Bantu-speaking Shona tribe. It is seen and often described as the lion with the black mane. It is the most prominent, most powerful, and oldest of the ancestral spirits honored by the Shona. Over the centuries, in times of need, Chaminuka the Mondoro would choose a spirit medium through which to lead the people. Whoever was chosen to become the medium became Chaminuka, a leader imbued with extraordinary gifts to influence nature. Only he who became Chaminuka knew the history of the Shona in its entirety, from the time when the very first Bantu migration began, when the ancestors of the Shona left the shores of the Lake Tanganyika, where the first man was created. This is the story of Chaminuka. A long time ago, in the lands now known as the Republic of Zimbabwe, there were many kingdoms ruled by different kings. But amongst those many kings, there was one who reigned supreme above all other kings. His name was Lobengula Kumalo, and he was the most feared man in all the lands. He was feared because of his military might and willingness to rain unimaginable violence upon whomever. Lobengula's army was like the edge of a sharp blade, comprised solely of the deadliest and most ruthless warriors to ever walk these lands. The Ndebele were trained from the tender age of 13, and because military conscription was mandatory, the Ndebele kingdom had the largest army ever witnessed. It was not easy for the royals of Matabeleland to sustain such an ever-growing army, and so they had imposed a steep tax called the annual tribute, which was meant to feed and sustain their ever-growing armies. Lobengula was a man obsessed with military dominance, and so, as his army grew in numbers, so did the annual tribute. The kingdoms were forced to give more and more each year, up to the point where their own progress and development had halted, as the kingdoms struggled to pay the ever-increasing annual tribute. The Shona people knew they could not defeat Ndebele in an armed conflict. Many had tried, such as the Bechuana chief, and whom, after crushing his army, Lobengula proceeded to slaughter the entire kingdom. Women, children, the elderly, no one was spared. But the Shona people did not give up hope. Instead, they offered sacrifice and prayed to their ancestors who watch over them from the afterlife to intervene and bring their long suffering to an end. Vakadeketera nenzio.
Hama dzangu munoda mugariro wakadini kopasipan, tinoda mugariro akanaka. Munhu wese anoda mugariro wakadini kopasipan, anoda mugariro akanaka. Hama oye munoda mugariro wakadini kopasipan, tinoda mugariro akanaka.
And so the ancestors answered their prayers through the spirit medium called Pasipamire. The Shona people's desire became a reality when Pasipamire did the impossible, and he struck a deal of peace and mutual cooperation with Lobengula, a deal that would finally bring the system of tribute to an end. Everything fell into place. Lobengula was given land, and he accepted it. And not long after that, Ndebele farmers had settled and had already begun to work the land. And as foretold by Pasipamire, the Ndebele found great success as farmers in Dungwiza. Lobengula's farms performed exceedingly well and above expectation. providing enough produce to sustain not only the great armies of Lobengula, but the people of Bulawayo as well. In the years that followed with Pasipamire's Mambo, lord of the land, a lot of change occurred across all the kingdoms. Pasipamire's true desire was to end the people's suffering and see peace prevail across the land and among the different tribes and peoples. Pasipamire traveled to all the kingdoms yearly, performing rain-making ceremonies. He played his mbira to summon the rains and bless the crops, ensuring that the peoples of all kingdoms and their livestock had enough to eat and drink. Pasipamire knew that peace and hunger cannot coexist in the same state, and so he believed that for peace to exist, hunger and poverty must be driven out. And as he traveled, he also made medicines for the sick and made new friends. Pasipamire fostered terms of peace between the Shona kings and Lobengula, king of the Ndebele. Lobengula did not need an annual tribute of grains. Pasipamire proposed to the Shona kings that Lobengula would cancel their annual tribute, and in exchange, the kings would look after and rear part of Lobengula's herd. You see, Lobengula was a very wealthy man, with an unimaginable number of cattle to his name. Lobengula's herd of cattle was now so huge that the lands of Bulawayo could simply not sustain them any longer. And so, the Shona kings agreed. And though ownership of the cattle would remain with Lobengula, the kings had the right to the milk and were allowed to use the cattle for labor. Also, on Pasipamire's travels, he spread the gospel of peace and tolerance and acceptance amongst the different tribes. He encouraged the tribes to share their skills and knowledge and to trade amongst each other. Trade steadily increased. Each tribe had their specialty. The Tonga, who lived along the mighty Zambezi and worshipped the Nyami Nyami, would trade fish and fish nets and weaved baskets made from river reeds. The Ndebele people, who were mostly cattle ranchers, traded in cattle. They sold precious bulls and calves. The other tribes traded beads, others crafted jewelry, and others traded in minerals such as gold, iron, and copper. Each tribe had a trade they were more skilled at more than the others, and this fostered trade and development across the land. The lives of the people in all kingdoms changed, gradually over time becoming better and better. Pasipamire, a simple man with no armies and no wealth to his name, without shedding any blood, had ushered in an era of sustained peace. And for many years, there was no war between the tribes. Instead, there was cooperation, trade, and mutual friendship. And just as Pasipamire had married the daughter of Lobengula, intertribal marriages began to occur and became more common. The Shona married the Ndebele and vice versa, the Tonga the Kalangas, and so it was amongst all the tribes. And due to this, all the tribes not only became bonded in friendship, but by blood as well. Pasipamire, now in his old age, had settled down on the outskirts of Dungwiza. He had been blessed with many sons and had kept close and good relations with Lobengula and the other kings of the land. Pasipamire had lived a long and productive life, full of wonders and mysticism, and he was satisfied with the life he had lived. Now he spent his days composing music and waiting to join his ancestors in the great afterlife. Pasipamire, being the prophet that he was, had predicted his own death and knew the date exactly when he would die. In the year that Pasipamire had foretold would be his last, close to the day, for the first time in his life, Pasipamire fell ill. His body grew weak. The years had caught up with him. His skin now wrinkled and his stature now a mere husk of the youthful and vital Mambo he had once been. His wife Bevia called a healer, hoping something could be done to prolong Pasipamire's life. But there was nothing the healer could do. It was old age. The healer told Pasipamire's family to say their goodbyes in time, as Pasipamire would not make it through the night. Pasipamire had instructed his sons that during his last day, they were to take him into the forest, under the tree where he had sat in his youth, and there where he had spoken to the huntsman. His sons were to leave him so that the Mondoro would come and take him to his ancestors. Pasipamire could no longer walk, and at dusk, Pasipamire's sons carried their father to the Mukesha tree to grant his final wish, and there they placed him under the tree. They put his mbira beside them and backed away as instructed by their father. They saw a mighty black-maned lion, the Mondoro, approach Pasipamire. The great beast lay beside Pasipamire, and using what seemed to be the last strength, his sons witnessed their father, Pasipamire, climb onto the back of the lion before it disappeared with them into the bush. The next morning, the entire kingdom of Dungwiza gathered around Pasipamire's homestead to mourn their great medium. And since there was no body, the mourners sought to go to the Mokesha tree where Pasipamire had been laid to rest by his sons to pay their respects there. And as they approached, they heard music coming from the Mokesha tree. The music was a rain summoning song often played by Pasipamire himself. The crowd approached the men under the tree, and they were shocked to see that it was in fact the very same man they had gathered to mourn. It was Pasipamire Tsuru, but instead of a sickly man so close to the brink of death, the Mondoro had restored his health and vitality. Pasipamire stood before the crowds and told them why he had been sent back to the world of the living. In a bold voice, Pasipamire announced to his people, "Okoyo vasina mabvi, vouya, chenjera vapambe pfumi, gadzirai zvombo, hondo isingarambike, yauya."